Are you ready to fall asleep with 100 interesting facts from 1980s America? Let's begin. 1. MTV launches in 1981, changing music forever. In August of 1981, American television experienced a quiet revolution when MTV Music Television broadcast its very first video. The opening choice, "Video Killed the Radio Star" by the Buggles, seemed more like a playful wink than a prediction, yet it captured the moment perfectly. For the first time, music was no longer just something you listened to, it was also something you watched. Young people gathered around the television not for sitcoms or dramas, but for a stream of colorful videos featuring their favorite bands. Suddenly, visual style mattered just as much as sound. Hair, makeup, costumes, and dance routines became inseparable from the songs themselves. MTV quickly became a cultural heartbeat for the 1980s, shaping fashion, slang, and even the careers of artists who understood how to command the screen. 2. The rise of blockbuster films like E.T. and Back to the Future. American movie theaters in the 1980s became gathering places for shared imagination. Directors such as Steven Spielberg and Robert Zemeckis gave audiences stories that combined wonder, humor, and emotion in ways that stuck for decades. E.T. The Extraterrestrial, released in 1982, told the simple yet magical tale of a child befriending an alien. Families lined up for weeks, and the film quickly became one of the most beloved of its time. Just a few years later, in 1985, Back to the Future introduced a time-traveling teenager and his eccentric scientist friend, along with a modified DeLorean car that became iconic overnight. These films didn't just entertain, they created worlds that felt both fantastical and deeply human. The idea of the blockbuster became a defining feature of cinema, as audiences eagerly awaited each summer release. 3. Michael Jackson's Thriller album success. In the early 1980s, one album transformed what pop music could achieve. Michael Jackson's Thriller, released in November of 1982, became more than just a collection of songs. It became a cultural phenomenon. With its blend of pop, rock, and R&B, along with groundbreaking music videos that felt more like short films, Thriller captivated audiences worldwide. The title track's 14-minute video, featuring elaborate choreography and a horror movie narrative, premiered on MTV and became an event in itself. Jackson's red leather jacket, single white glove, and moonwalk dance move entered the American consciousness overnight. The album went on to become the best-selling album of all time, producing 7 top 10 singles and winning 8 Grammy Awards. It proved that music could be a complete artistic experience, blending sound, vision, and performance into something unforgettable. 4. The Rubik's Cube craze. A simple-looking puzzle from Hungary captured the imagination of millions of Americans during the 1980s. The Rubik's Cube, a colorful 3-dimensional puzzle invented by Erno Rubik, arrived in the United States around 1980 and quickly became an obsession. Schools, offices, and living rooms filled with the clicking sounds of people twisting and turning the cube's faces, trying to align all the colors. What appeared easy at first, just match the colors, revealed itself to be maddeningly complex, with over 43 quintillion possible configurations. Some solved it in minutes, while others spent weeks trying to complete even one side. Books teaching solving methods became bestsellers, and competitions emerged to see who could solve it fastest. The Rubik's Cube became more than a toy. It was a symbol of the decade's fascination with puzzles, patterns, and the satisfaction of solving something seemingly impossible. 5. Pac-Man fever in arcades. The blinking lights and electronic beeps of arcade games defined weekend entertainment for young Americans in the early 1980s, and no game captured hearts quite like Pac-Man. Released in 1980, this simple yellow character navigating mazes while gobbling dots and avoiding colorful ghosts became a sensation unlike anything gaming had seen before. Arcades filled with players feeding quarters into machines, trying to beat high scores and reach new levels. The game's appeal crossed age and gender lines unusual for the time, making it a genuinely universal experience. Pac-Man appeared everywhere, on lunchboxes, Saturday morning cartoons, board games, and even a top 40 hit song called Pac-Man Fever. The character became one of the first true video game icons, proving that gaming could be more than a passing fad. It could be a central part of American popular culture. 6. The Cosby Show and sitcom dominance. Thursday nights in 1980s, America often meant gathering around the television to watch The Cosby Show, a sitcom that redefined what family television could be. Premiering in 1984, The show followed the Huxtable family, an upper-middle-class, African-American family living in Brooklyn. Dr. Heathcliff Huxtable, played by Bill Cosby, was an obstetrician, and his wife Claire was a successful attorney. The show presented a warm, humorous look at parenting, marriage, and the everyday challenges of raising 5 children. Its sharp writing, relatable situations, and positive portrayal of a successful black family resonated with audiences of all backgrounds. The Cosby Show consistently ranked as the #1 show on television for several years, revitalizing the sitcom format and proving that wholesome family entertainment could dominate primetime. It became a cultural touchstone, sparking conversations about representation, family values, and the power of television to shape perceptions. 7. VHS versus Betamax wars. In living rooms across America during the early 1980s, a quiet but intense battle played out between 2 competing video formats, VHS and Betamax. Both technologies allowed families to record television shows and watch rented movies at home, a revolutionary concept that changed entertainment forever. Sony's Betamax offered slightly superior picture quality, but VHS, developed by JVC, had a crucial advantage: longer recording times and lower prices. As more movie rental stores stocked VHS tapes and more manufacturers produced VHS players, the format gained momentum. Consumers faced a dilemma: which system should they invest in? The uncertainty didn't last long. By the mid-1980s, VHS had clearly won, and Betamax gradually faded away. This format war became a classic case study in how market adoption and availability often matter more than technical superiority. The victory of VHS meant that home video became standardized, paving the way for the video rental boom that defined the rest of the decade. 8. The Walkman as a portable revolution. Before the 1980s, music was largely a stationary experience. You listened at home on a stereo or in the car on the radio. Then Sony introduced the Walkman, and suddenly music became something you could carry with you everywhere. Released in 1979 but exploding in popularity throughout the 1980s, this portable cassette player with lightweight headphones transformed daily life. Joggers ran to their favorite songs, students studied with background music, and commuters turned crowded buses into private concert halls. The Walkman represented a shift toward personal, customizable experiences. You could create mixtapes, curate your own soundtrack to life, and tune out the world when you wanted to. The sight of someone walking down the street with foam headphones became iconic of the decade. The Walkman wasn't just a device, it was a statement about independence, personal choice, and the desire to have music as a constant companion. 9. Saturday morning cartoons flourish. For children of the 1980s, Saturday mornings meant one thing: cartoons. From roughly 7 in the morning until noon, television networks broadcast hours of animated programming specifically designed for kids. Shows like He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, Thundercats, The Smurfs, Transformers, and G.I. Joe dominated the airwaves. Children would wake up early, pour themselves bowls of sugary cereal, and settle in for a marathon of action, adventure, and humor. These shows were more than just entertainment, they were a shared cultural experience. Monday mornings at school buzzed with conversations about the latest episodes. Many of these cartoons were also tied to toy lines, creating a powerful synergy between what kids watched and what they wanted to play with. Saturday morning cartoons represented a weekly ritual, a sacred time when children controlled the television, and parents enjoyed a few hours of relative peace. 10. The emergence of hip-hop culture. In the streets, parks, and community centers of American cities during the late 1970s and early 1980s, a new cultural movement was taking shape: hip-hop. Born in the Bronx, New York, hip-hop combined 4 key elements: rapping, MCing, DJing, breakdancing, and graffiti art into a vibrant form of expression. Early pioneers like Grandmaster Flash, Afrika Bambaataa, and Run DMC brought innovative sounds and socially conscious lyrics to audiences who had rarely seen their experiences reflected in mainstream music. What started as block parties with DJs spinning records on turntables grew into a cultural phenomenon. By the mid-1980s, hip-hop was spreading beyond New York, influencing fashion with tracksuits, sneakers, and gold chains, and reshaping how young people communicated through language and style. Hip-hop offered a voice to communities often overlooked by mainstream media, and its influence would only grow in the decades to come, eventually becoming one of the most dominant forces in global music and culture. Meanwhile, in everyday American life. 11. average home prices, and affordability. In the early 1980s, the American housing market presented both opportunities and challenges. The median home price in 1980 hovered around $64,600, a figure that seems modest by today's standards, but represented a significant investment for families at the time. However, context matters. Mortgage interest rates during this period were extraordinarily high, often exceeding 12% and sometimes reaching above 18% by 1981. This made monthly payments steep, even for modestly priced homes. Young families saved for years to accumulate down payments, and home ownership represented a major milestone. Despite the high interest rates, owning a home remained a central part of the American dream, and many families stretched their budgets to make it happen. Neighborhoods expanded as suburbs continued to grow, and the ranch-style home with a two-car garage symbolized middle-class success. The housing market of the 1980s reflected broader economic pressures, but also the enduring desire for stability and a place to call one's own. 12. The cost of a gallon of gas. Filling up at the gas station in the 1980s came with its own drama. After the oil crises of the 1970s, Americans remained sensitive to fluctuations in gas prices. In 1980, a gallon of gas cost around $1.19, which might sound cheap now but represented a real expense for families managing tight budgets. Prices varied throughout the decade, dropping as low as $0.90 by the mid-80s when oil supplies stabilized. The cost of gas influenced everything from vacation plans to daily commutes. Fuel efficiency became a selling point for cars, and automakers began producing smaller, more economical vehicles alongside the traditional gas-guzzling sedans. Americans calculated miles per gallon carefully, and sometimes altered their driving habits to save money. The price at the pump wasn't just an economic issue, it reflected global politics, energy independence concerns, and the country's relationship with oil-producing nations. For many, checking gas prices became as routine as checking the weather. 13. Grocery shopping and food costs. A trip to the grocery store in the 1980s offered a snapshot of American eating habits and household economics. A gallon of milk cost around $2.16 in 1980, while a loaf of bread ran about $0.50. A dozen eggs might set you back $0.84, and ground beef was roughly $1.80 per pound. Families clipped coupons from newspapers, planned meals around weekly sales, and often visited multiple stores to find the best deals. The rise of large supermarket chains offered more variety and competitive pricing, but many neighborhoods still had smaller corner grocers. Shopping carts filled with recognizable brands. Kellogg's cereals, Campbell's soups, Coca-Cola, and Kraft products dominated the aisles. Convenience, foods like frozen dinners and microwavable meals grew in popularity as more households had two working parents. The weekly grocery bill was a significant household expense, and careful budgeting was necessary. Food shopping wasn't just about sustenance, it reflected family priorities, economic status, and the evolving pace of American life. Telephone bills and long-distance calling. In the 1980s, making a phone call, especially long-distance, required planning and awareness of cost. Local calls were usually included in basic monthly phone service, which ran around $10 to $20, but long-distance charges added up quickly. Calling across state lines might cost $0.40 per minute during daytime hours, dropping to around $0.20 during evenings and weekends. Families watched the clock carefully during long-distance conversations, sometimes timing calls to stay within budgets. Special occasions like holidays saw phone lines jammed as people called relatives across the country, knowing the expense was worth it. The phrase "keep it short" was common when someone picked up the phone for a long-distance call. AT&T dominated the telephone industry until its breakup in 1984, after which companies like MCI and Sprint competed for long-distance customers with various calling plans. The telephone bill, often itemized with each long-distance call listed, was scrutinized monthly. Phone conversations were precious, planned events rather than the casual, constant communication we know today. Movie ticket prices. Going to the movies in the 1980s was an affordable treat for most American families. A standard movie ticket cost around $2.69 in 1980, though prices gradually increased throughout the decade, reaching approximately $3.55 by 1989. For less than $10, a family of three could see a film together, making cinema an accessible form of entertainment. Theaters often featured double features, and matinee showings offered even cheaper prices. The experience included sticky floors, the smell of buttered popcorn, and the excitement of seeing films on the big screen, an experience that television couldn't replicate. Moviegoing was social. Groups of friends met at the theater, couples went on dates, and families made it a weekend tradition. Concession stand prices were reasonable too. Popcorn, candy, and soda added a few dollars to the outing, but didn't break the bank. The relative affordability of movies meant that cinema remained central to American entertainment culture, and the theater became a place where communities gathered to share stories, laughter, and sometimes tears. The personal computer revolution begins. The 1980s witnessed the transformation of computers from mysterious machines in corporate offices to household items that promised to change everyday life. In 1981, IBM introduced its personal computer, known as the IBM PC, which quickly became the standard for business use. Around the same time, companies like Apple, Commodore, and Tandy released their own models aimed at home users. The Apple II became especially popular in schools and homes, with its color graphics and expandable design. These early computers were expensive, often $1,000 to $3,000, and came with limited memory and processing power by today's standards. Users loaded programs from cassette tapes or floppy disks, and many learned to write simple code in BASIC. The promise was enticing. Computers could balance checkbooks, store recipes, teach children, and even play games. Computer stores appeared in shopping malls, and magazines like Compute and Byte catered to enthusiasts. Not everyone understood what a home computer was for, but the message was clear. The future was digital, and it was arriving in American living rooms. Video game consoles enter the home. The early 1980s brought arcade gaming excitement directly into American homes through video game consoles. The Atari 2600, released in the late 1970s, dominated the market in the early part of the decade, allowing families to play games like Space Invaders, Asteroids, and Pitfall on their televisions. For around $200, parents could buy a console and a few game cartridges, providing hours of entertainment. Living rooms transformed as children and teenagers crowded around TV screens, joysticks in hand, competing for high scores. However, the industry faced a crash in 1983 due to market oversaturation and poor quality games, causing many to question gaming's future. Then, in 1985, Nintendo released the Nintendo Entertainment System, NES, in North America, revitalizing the industry. Games like Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, and Metroid offered rich gameplay, memorable characters, and experiences that kept players engaged for weeks. The NES rebuilt consumer trust and established video gaming as a permanent fixture in American homes, laying the foundation for the massive gaming industry that exists today. The compact disc arrives. Music lovers in the 1980s witnessed a technological leap when the compact disc, CD, arrived as a new format. Introduced commercially in 1982, CDs promised crystal-clear sound quality, no surface noise, and durability that vinyl records and cassette tapes couldn't match. Early CD players were expensive, often several $100s, but audiophiles and early adopters embraced the technology enthusiastically. The shiny, rainbow-reflective discs looked futuristic, and the ability to skip directly to any track without rewinding or fast-forwarding felt revolutionary. Record stores gradually expanded their CD sections, and major artists began releasing albums on CD alongside traditional formats. By the mid to late 80s, CD players became more affordable, and the format gained mainstream acceptance. The digital audio quality meant that listeners could hear details in their favorite songs they'd never noticed before. The CD represented more than just better sound. It symbolized the broader shift toward digital technology that would define the coming decades. Vinyl collectors resisted, but the convenience and clarity of CDs gradually won over most music fans. Answering machines become common. Missing a phone call in the 1980s no longer meant lost opportunities, thanks to the growing popularity of answering machines. These devices, which recorded messages when no one was home, became increasingly common in American households throughout the decade. Early models used cassette tapes to record both the outgoing greeting and incoming messages, and they often sat on a table next to the telephone. Coming home to a blinking light that indicated messages waiting became a familiar part of daily life. People carefully crafted their outgoing greetings, sometimes adding humor or music, and there was a certain awkwardness to leaving messages speaking to a machine felt unnatural at first. Businesses embraced answering machines quickly, as they ensured no customer call went unanswered. The technology wasn't perfect, tapes wore out, messages occasionally got erased, and the beep after the greeting sometimes caught people off guard. Still, answering machines represented a significant step toward the connected world we live in today, ensuring that communication could happen asynchronously and that important information wouldn't be lost simply because someone wasn't home. Cable television expands. Television in the 1980s underwent a transformation as cable TV expanded from a luxury to a common household service. In the early part of the decade, many Americans still relied on over-the-air broadcast channels. ABC, NBC, CBS, and perhaps PBS received through rooftop antennas. Cable changed everything by offering dozens of channels through a physical cable connection, providing clearer signals and far more variety. Channels like HBO and Showtime brought commercial-free movies and original programming, while ESPN revolutionized sports broadcasting and CNN provided 24-hour news coverage. Specialized channels emerged for music. MTV, Weather, The Weather Channel, children's programming, Nickelodeon, and more. Families debated whether the monthly subscription fee, typically $20 to $30, was worth it. But as more neighbors got cable, the pressure to subscribe grew. The remote control, which became standard with cable boxes, put unprecedented power in viewers' hands. Channel surfing became a new pastime. Cable television fragmented audiences but also created communities around specific interests, and it fundamentally changed how Americans consumed media and entertainment. Shoulder pads and power dressing. Fashion in the 1980s made bold statements, and perhaps no trend embodied this more than shoulder pads. Women's professional clothing featured exaggerated shoulders that created a strong, angular silhouette, symbolizing power and authority in the workplace. This power dressing trend reflected the growing number of women in corporate America and their desire to project confidence and competence. Blazers, blouses, and even casual wear came with built-in shoulder pads that extended well beyond natural shoulder width. The look was simultaneously professional and aggressive, mirroring the competitive business culture of the decade. Paired with pencil skirts, bold jewelry, and high heels, the power suit became armor for women navigating male-dominated industries. Men's fashion also embraced broader shoulders, with suit jackets featuring structured padding. Television shows like Dynasty and Dallas popularized the look, and department stores dedicated entire sections to power dressing. While the trend eventually faded, it represented an important moment when fashion explicitly connected to professional aspirations and gender equality in the workplace. Neon colors and athletic wear. The 1980s exploded with color, particularly the bright neon shades of pink, green, yellow, and orange that seemed to glow under the right lighting. Athletic wear moved from gyms to everyday fashion, driven partly by the aerobics craze and the growing fitness movement. Spandex leggings, leg warmers, headbands, and leotards became acceptable streetwear, not just workout clothes. People wore these items to run errands, meet friends, or simply as a fashion statement. The look was completed with athletic shoes. Brands like Nike, Reebok, and Adidas became fashion symbols beyond their functional purpose. Music videos on MTV showcased performers in neon outfits and athletic gear, making the style aspirational. The trend reflected a broader cultural emphasis on fitness, youth, and energy. Neon accessories like sunglasses, jewelry, and even shoelaces added pops of color to any outfit. The style was unapologetically bold and playful, rejecting the more subdued tones of previous decades. Whether you were actually athletic or not, wearing the gear signaled that you were active, energetic, and in tune with contemporary culture. Big hair and hairspray. The bigger the hair, the better. That seemed to be the motto of 1980s hairstyle trends. Both men and women embraced volume, with styles that defied gravity through liberal applications of hairspray, mousse, and gel. Women teased their hair to create height and body, often curling it into large, loose waves or perms that added maximum fullness. The resulting styles could add several inches to one's height and required significant time and product to maintain. Rock bands and music videos popularized the look, with both male and female musicians sporting impressively voluminous hair. Aerosol hairspray became an essential bathroom item, and some estimates suggest Americans used enough hairspray to create serious concerns about environmental impact. Hairstyles had names. The mall bangs stood vertically from the forehead, while the mullet business, in front, party in back, became iconic, though often later ridiculed. Achieving the perfect hair required dedication, product, and often a blow-dryer. The emphasis on big hair reflected the decade's broader preference for boldness and visibility. Subtlety was not the goal. Preppy style and designer labels. Not all 1980s fashion was loud and bold. The preppy style offered a more refined, traditional alternative that nonetheless made its own statement. Inspired by Ivy League college aesthetics, the preppy look featured polo shirts, especially from Ralph Lauren, khaki pants, boat shoes, and pastel colors. Sweaters tied around shoulders, crisp button-down shirts, and tennis skirts created a clean, wholesome appearance that suggested education, good breeding, and country club membership. Designer labels became increasingly visible and important. Clothing with recognizable brand logos, Ralph Lauren's polo player, Lacoste's alligator, or Izod's crocodile served as status symbols. Young people saved money to buy authentic designer pieces rather than generic alternatives. The Preppy Handbook, published in 1980, codified the rules and became a cultural touchstone. This style represented aspiration, suggesting success and social standing. While preppy fashion had existed before, the 1980s commercialized and democratized it, making it accessible through department stores while still maintaining its association with privilege and exclusivity. Denim. Everything denim in the 1980s went far beyond simple blue jeans. The fabric appeared in jackets, skirts, vests, dresses, bags, and even shoes. Denim-on-denim outfits, sometimes called Canadian tuxedos, became fashionable despite earlier associations with working-class or rural style. Acid-wash denim, with its deliberately faded, almost bleached appearance, became especially trendy mid-decade. Designers like Calvin Klein and Guess elevated denim from purely functional to fashionable, with premium designer jeans costing significantly more than department store brands. Tight-fitting jeans for both men and women became standard, and the brand name mattered jeans were no longer just utilitarian workwear but fashion statements. Stone-washed, distressed, and even pre-ripped jeans appeared, offering a worn-in look without the weight. People customized their denim with patches, pins, and embroidery, making each piece personal. Denim's versatility meant it fit into virtually any social situation, from casual weekends to nights out. The fabric became a canvas for self-expression and a unifying element in American casual wear. The Lakers-Celtics rivalry. The NBA in the 1980s was defined by one of the greatest rivalries in sports history, the Los Angeles Lakers versus the Boston Celtics. These two teams, led by Magic Johnson and Larry Bird respectively, faced each other 3 times in the NBA Finals during the decade 1984, 1985, and 1987, producing memorable games that captivated the nation. The rivalry represented more than just basketball. It embodied contrasts in style, Lakers' Showtime flash versus Celtics' blue-collar grind, geography, West Coast versus East Coast, and personality, Magic's smile versus Bird's intensity. The competition raised the profile of professional basketball, bringing new fans to the sport and transforming the NBA into a major entertainment enterprise. Games were must-watch television, water-cooler conversation topics, and cultural events. Both players elevated their teammates. The Lakers featured Kareem Abdul-Jabbar while the Celtics had Kevin McHale and Robert Parrish. The rivalry renewed interest in the NBA at a time when the league needed stars, and it proved that sports narratives built around compelling personalities and genuine competition could transcend the game itself. The Miracle on Ice. One of the most memorable sports moments in American history occurred at the 1980 Winter Olympics in Lake Placid, New York, the U.S. Men's hockey team, composed of amateur and collegiate players, faced the powerhouse Soviet Union team in the medal round. The Soviets had dominated international hockey for years and had defeated an NHL All-Star team just a year earlier. Few gave the young Americans any chance. Yet, in one of sport's greatest upsets, the US team defeated the Soviets 4-3 inches, a game that transcended sports. Announcer Al Michaels' famous call, "Do you believe in miracles?" "Yes," captured the emotion of the moment. The victory came during the Cold War, adding geopolitical significance to the sporting achievement. 2 days later, the US defeated Finland to clinch the gold medal. The Miracle on Ice became a symbol of hope, determination, and the American spirit. It demonstrated that heart, teamwork, and belief could overcome superior talent and resources. The game remains one of the most replayed and celebrated moments in American sports history. Wayne Gretzky's NHL dominance. Hockey fans in the 1980s witnessed greatness on ice through Wayne Gretzky, who redefined what was possible in the sport. Playing primarily for the Edmonton Oilers, Gretzky shattered records with a combination of skill, vision, and hockey intelligence that seemed almost supernatural. In the 1981-82 season, he scored an incredible 92 goals and added 120 assists for 212 points, records that still stand. He won the Hart Trophy as league MVP 8 consecutive years, 1980 to 1987, and led the Oilers to 4 Stanley Cup championships during the decade. Known as the Great One, Gretzky made the game look effortless, seeing plays develop before they happened and making passes that seemed impossible. His trade to the Los Angeles Kings in 1988 shocked the sports world and was considered by many Canadians as a national tragedy. Gretzky's dominance brought new attention to hockey, especially in non-traditional markets, and he became a global sports icon. His combination of talent, sportsmanship, and consistency made him one of the greatest athletes in any sport. The rise of women's sports. The 1980s saw increased visibility and legitimacy for women's athletics, building on the foundation laid by Title IX legislation passed in 1972. Women's basketball gained prominence, with college programs drawing larger crowds and receiving more media coverage. Players like Cheryl Miller dominated the college game and inspired younger generations. Tennis stars like Martina Navratilova and Chris Evert competed in legendary matches that drew television audiences and demonstrated the commercial viability of women's sports. Track and field athletes like Jackie Joyner-Kersee and Florence Griffith Joyner became household names, achieving athletic feats that garnered respect beyond gender. Gymnastics also captured American attention, particularly after Mary Lou Retton became the first American woman to win the Olympic all-around gold medal in 1984. While challenges remained unequal pay, less media coverage, and fewer opportunities compared to men, the trajectory was positive. Young girls increasingly saw female athletes as role models and proof that sports excellence wasn't exclusively male. The progress made during the 1980s laid groundwork for future advancement in women's athletics. Boxing's heavyweights. The heavyweight boxing division in the 1980s produced dramatic storylines and compelling champions who became cultural figures beyond sports. Larry Holmes began the decade as champion, successfully defending his title multiple times with technical skill and power. Then came the dramatic rise of Mike Tyson, who burst onto the scene in 1986 with devastating knockouts and intimidating presence. At just 20 years old, Tyson became the youngest heavyweight champion in history, and his early fights rarely lasted beyond a few rounds. His combination of speed, power, and ferocity made him must-watch television. Boxing matches became major pay-per-view events, drawing massive audiences and generating enormous revenue. The sport maintained its place in American popular culture, with championship fights feeling like national events. Tyson appeared on magazine covers and talk shows, transcending sports to become a broader cultural phenomenon. While controversy eventually surrounded Tyson's career, his dominance in the late 1980s reminded Americans why boxing had once been called the sweet science, and why heavyweight champions had always held a special place in sports mythology. Primetime soap operas. Evening television in the 1980s belonged to glossy, dramatic soap operas that captivated millions of Americans. Shows like Dallas and Dynasty featured wealthy families with complicated relationships, business intrigue, and moral ambiguity. Dallas, which began in the late 70s but peaked in the early 80s, created one of television's most memorable moments with the Who Shot JR cliffhanger. The 1980 reveal drew over 83 million viewers, making it one of the most watched television episodes in American history. Dynasty countered with its own brand of luxury and scandal, featuring Joan Collins as the scheming Alexis Carrington. These shows offered escapist fantasy mansions, designer clothes, beautiful people, and problems that regular Americans couldn't imagine having. The glamour and excess reflected and perhaps celebrated the materialism of the decade. Viewers tuned in weekly, gathered for watch parties, and discussed plot twists at work the next day. These primetime soap operas proved that serialized storytelling could work outside daytime television, and that audiences craved ongoing narratives with character development across seasons. The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Late-night television in the 1980s meant Johnny Carson. As host of The Tonight Show, Carson commanded the 11:30 p.m. time slot for 30 years, but his influence peaked during the 80s when he became an institution. Every weeknight, millions of Americans ended their day by watching Carson's monologue, celebrity interviews, and comedy sketches. His conversational style, quick wit, and genuine curiosity made guests comfortable and audiences loyal. An appearance on Carson's show could launch a comedian's career. He gave early exposure to Jerry Seinfeld, Jay Leno, and countless others. Musicians performed, authors promoted books, and celebrities shared stories in what felt like an intimate conversation despite the massive audience. Carson's desk became the most coveted seat in American entertainment. His influence extended beyond entertainment. His monologue jokes shaped public perception of current events and politics. When Carson found something funny, America laughed. When he retired in 1992, it felt like the end of an era. But throughout the 1980s, he was late-night royalty, and his show was a nightly ritual for millions. CNN and 24-hour news. The concept of news coverage changed forever when CNN, cable news network, launched in June of 1980. Before CNN, Americans received news at specific times: morning papers, evening broadcasts, and late-night recaps. CNN's promise was revolutionary. News whenever you wanted it, 24 hours a day. Initially, many skeptics questioned whether there was enough news to fill 24 hours or whether Americans wanted constant news access. CNN proved them wrong. The network started small, with a modest budget and young, inexperienced reporters willing to work for the chance to be on camera. But CNN's around-the-clock coverage meant it could respond immediately to breaking news, providing live updates while traditional networks stuck to scheduled programming. Major events like the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger in 1986 demonstrated CNN's value. Viewers could watch coverage unfold in real time rather than waiting for the evening news. By decade's end, CNN had established itself as essential, proving that Americans wanted access to information on their schedule. The network changed journalism, accelerated news cycles, and set the template for the information-saturated world we live in today. Cheers and workplace sitcoms. Not all 1980s television was glitz and glamour. Some of the decade's best shows found humor and heart in ordinary places. Cheers, which premiered in 1982, took place almost entirely in a Boston bar where everybody knows your name. The show followed the staff and regular customers of Cheers, a neighborhood tavern, creating comedy from their relationships, insecurities, and daily interactions. Sam Malone, a former baseball player turned bartender, led an ensemble cast that included the pretentious psychiatrist Fraser Crane, the know-it-all mailman Cliff Clavin, and the sharp-tongued waitress Carla Tortelli. The show's genius lay in its character development and witty dialogue. These weren't caricatures but fully realized people whose flaws made them relatable. Cheers struggled in its first season with low ratings, but NBC gave it time to find an audience, and it became one of the most beloved sitcoms of all time. The bar became a character itself, a warm, welcoming place where people gathered not just for drinks, but for community. The workplace sitcom format, where co-workers became a chosen family, influenced countless shows that followed. Cheers proved that comedy didn't need exotic locations or gimmicks. It just needed great writing and characters viewers cared about. Saturday Night Live's second golden age, Saturday Night Live in the 1980s, experienced a renaissance after struggling in the late 70s, following the departure of original cast members. The show rebuilt itself with new talent who became comedy legends. Eddie Murphy, whose characters and celebrity impressions made him the show's biggest star in the early 80s. Joe Piscopo, Dana Carvey, Phil Hartman, and Mike Myers, who arrived later in the decade. Eddie Murphy particularly revitalized the show, creating memorable characters like Gumby and Mr. Robinson, while his impersonations of Stevie Wonder and James Brown became instant classics. His success on SNL launched him into movie stardom. The show maintained its edge, satirizing politics, pop culture, and current events every Saturday night at 11:30. Musical guests represented the era's biggest acts, and hosting SNL became a badge of honor for celebrities. The irreverent humor, live format, and willingness to take risks made SNL essential viewing for young adults. The show proved it could survive cast changes and remain culturally relevant, establishing a template for reinvention that has kept it on the air for decades. The Reagan presidency, Ronald Reagan, served as the 40th President of the United States from 1981 to 1989, making him a defining figure of the decade. Reagan, a former actor and California governor, brought a communication style that earned him the nickname the Great Communicator. His presidency emphasized conservative economic policies, often called Reaganomics, which included tax cuts, reduced government spending on social programs, and deregulation of industries. Supporters credited these policies with spurring economic growth and reducing inflation, while critics argued they increased income inequality and the national debt. Reagan took a firm stance against the Soviet Union, famously calling it an evil empire, while simultaneously pursuing arms reduction negotiations later in his presidency. His optimistic vision of America and his ability to connect with ordinary citizens through television made him popular, though his policies remained controversial. The Reagan years saw significant political realignment, with many working-class voters shifting toward the Republican Party. Whether viewed positively or negatively, Reagan's influence on American politics, economics, and culture extended well beyond the 1980s. The Cold War continues. The Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union remained a constant backdrop to American life throughout the 1980s. The decade began with heightened tensions. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 led to an American boycott of the 1980 Moscow Olympics. Nuclear anxiety persisted, with both superpowers maintaining massive arsenals capable of destroying the world many times over. Television movies like The Day After, 1983, depicted the aftermath of nuclear war, bringing these fears into living rooms and sparking national conversations about the arms race. The Reagan administration increased defense spending and proposed the Strategic Defense Initiative, nicknamed Star Wars, which aimed to use space-based systems to defend against nuclear missiles. However, the latter part of the decade saw dramatic changes. Mikhail Gorbachev became Soviet leader in 1985 and introduced reforms known as glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. Reagan and Gorbachev developed a working relationship, signing the INF Treaty in 1987 to eliminate certain nuclear weapons. As the decade ended, the Cold War was beginning to thaw, though few predicted how quickly change would come. The Space Shuttle program. America's space program in the 1980s centered on the Space Shuttle, a reusable spacecraft that promised to make space travel routine. The program began with Columbia's successful flight in April of 1981, marking the first reusable spacecraft to reach orbit and return. Shuttles continued flying regularly, launching satellites, conducting scientific experiments, and capturing public imagination. The program emphasized the everyday nature of space travel, with astronauts including scientists, engineers, and eventually, in 1986, a schoolteacher named Krista McAuliffe selected to be the first private citizen in space. Tragically, on January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded 73 seconds after launch, killing all 7 crew members, including McAuliffe. The disaster was broadcast live, with many schoolchildren watching because of McAuliffe's presence. The nation mourned, and the space program halted for over 2 years, while investigators determined the cause, a failed O-ring seal, and made safety improvements. The Challenger disaster reminded Americans that space exploration remained dangerous, and that progress sometimes came with painful costs. When shuttle flights resumed in 1988, they carried forward with renewed emphasis on safety. The AIDS crisis. The 1980s saw the emergence and spread of AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, which created a public health crisis and profound social impact. The disease was first officially recognized in 1981, though initially it was poorly understood and primarily associated with specific communities, particularly gay men and intravenous drug users. This led to significant stigma, fear, and discrimination against those affected. As the decade progressed, understanding grew that AIDS was caused by a virus, HIV, that could be transmitted through blood and sexual contact, affecting anyone regardless of demographics. The epidemic claimed thousands of lives, including celebrities like Rock Hudson, whose diagnosis in 1985 helped bring mainstream attention to the crisis. Activists formed organizations like ACT UP to demand more research, funding, and faster drug approval processes. The Reagan administration's response was criticized by many as too slow and inadequate. Grassroots organizations provided education, support, and care when government response lagged. The AIDS crisis changed conversations about sexuality, public health, and medical research. It revealed both the worst in human behavior, discrimination, and fear, and the best compassion, activism, and community support. The impact extended far beyond health, influencing art, politics, and social attitudes. The fall of the Berlin Wall approaches. While the Berlin Wall wouldn't actually fall until November of 1989, the events of the late 1980s set the stage for this historic moment. The wall, built in 1961, had divided East and West Berlin for nearly 3 decades, becoming the most visible symbol of Cold War division. Throughout the 80s, the Soviet Union's grip on Eastern Europe gradually weakened. Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms in the Soviet Union encouraged similar changes in satellite states. Poland's solidarity movement gained strength, and Hungary began opening its borders. In East Germany, public pressure for reform intensified. Throughout 1989, thousands of East Germans fled through Hungary and Czechoslovakia, while protests in East German cities grew larger and more frequent. The East German government, facing mounting pressure and without Soviet military support to suppress protests, began losing control. When the wall finally opened on November 9, 1989, it marked not just the reunification of Berlin, but the symbolic end of the Cold War itself. For Americans watching these events unfold on television, it seemed almost miraculous. A conflict that had defined much of the 20th century was ending not with war but with celebration. The personal computer transforms work. Beyond home use, personal computers revolutionized American workplaces during the 1980s. Offices that had relied on typewriters, filing cabinets, and paper memos began transitioning to computer-based systems. Word processing programs like WordPerfect and Microsoft Word eliminated the need for retyping documents when changes were needed. Spreadsheet software, particularly Lotus 1-2-3 and later Microsoft Excel, transformed accounting and financial analysis, allowing complex calculations that would have taken hours to be completed in minutes. Databases organized information more efficiently than paper filing systems. Initially, many workers resisted, comfortable with familiar methods and intimidated by technology, but as computers proved their value, adoption accelerated. Secretaries became administrative assistants with expanded responsibilities, while new jobs emerged: computer programmers, systems administrators, and IT support specialists. Training programs proliferated to help workers adapt. The workplace became quieter as the clacking of typewriters gave way to the softer clicking of keyboards. The computer's presence on virtually every desk by decade's end marked a fundamental shift in how work was performed, signaling the arrival of the information age. Compact disc technology advances. The technology behind compact discs represented a significant leap in how information could be stored and retrieved using digital methods. Unlike analog formats like vinyl records or cassette tapes, CDs encoded audio as a series of microscopic pits on a plastic disc, read by a laser. This digital storage meant no physical contact between the reading mechanism and the disc, eliminating the wear that plagued earlier formats. The same technology that revolutionized music also found applications in computer data storage with CD-ROMs, compact disc read-only memory, which could hold far more information than floppy disks. A single CD-ROM could store around 650 megabytes of data, equivalent to hundreds of floppy disks. This made distributing software, encyclopedias, and multimedia content practical for the first time. By the late 1980s, CD technology was pointing toward a future where digital storage would replace analog methods across multiple industries. The precision required to manufacture CDs, pits measuring less than a micrometer, showcased advancing manufacturing capabilities. The CD represented not just a new product, but a new way of thinking about information storage that would influence technology development for decades. Medical imaging improvements. Medical diagnosis advanced significantly during the 1980s as imaging technologies became more sophisticated and accessible. Computed tomography, CT, scans, which used X-rays to create detailed cross-sectional images of the body, became faster and more precise. Magnetic resonance, imaging, MRI, technology, which used magnetic fields and radio waves to produce detailed images of soft tissues, transitioned from experimental to clinical use. Unlike X-rays, MRIs didn't use ionizing radiation, making them safer for repeated use. These imaging technologies allowed doctors to see inside the human body with unprecedented clarity without surgery. Physicians could detect tumors, diagnose injuries, and understand diseases in ways previously impossible. While expensive, a single scan could cost hundreds or thousands of dollars. Insurance often covered the procedures when medically necessary. Hospitals invested in imaging equipment, and radiology became an increasingly important medical specialty. The ability to visualize internal structures transformed medicine from an art based largely on external symptoms and educated guesses to a more precise science backed by clear visual evidence. Patients benefited from earlier detection and more accurate diagnoses, improving outcomes across numerous conditions. Environmental awareness grows. The 1980s saw increasing public awareness of environmental issues and humanity's impact on the planet. The discovery of a hole in the ozone layer above Antarctica, announced in 1985, shocked scientists and the public. Research linked the damage to chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, used in refrigerators, air conditioners, and aerosol sprays. This led to the Montreal Protocol in 1987, an international agreement to phase out ozone-depleting substances, one of the most successful environmental treaties ever enacted. Concerns about acid rain, caused by sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide emissions from industry and vehicles, led to discussions about pollution controls. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986 highlighted the potential dangers of nuclear power. Deforestation, particularly of rainforests, became an international concern. Recycling programs expanded in many American communities, and consciousness about waste grew. While climate change wasn't yet a mainstream concern, the foundation was being laid for future environmental movements. The 1980s demonstrated that environmental problems could be global in scope, but also that international cooperation could address them effectively. Genetic research advances. The field of genetics made significant strides during the 1980s, moving closer to understanding the fundamental blueprint of human life. Genetic engineering techniques improved, allowing scientists to modify organisms by inserting or removing specific genes. This led to practical applications. In 1982, the first genetically engineered human insulin received FDA approval, offering a new treatment for diabetes that didn't rely on animal-derived insulin. Other genetically modified products followed, including human growth hormone. The concept of DNA fingerprinting was developed in 1984, providing a powerful tool for criminal investigations and paternity testing based on unique genetic markers. Scientists began discussing the possibility of mapping the entire human genome, a project that seemed impossibly ambitious, but would launch in earnest in 1990. These advances raised ethical questions about genetic modification, privacy, and the potential consequences of manipulating life at the molecular level. Public debates emerged about genetically modified organisms in food production and the implications of genetic testing. The 1980s marked genetics' transition from a primarily theoretical field to one with immediate practical applications that would transform medicine, agriculture, and forensics. Cabbage Patch Kids mania. Few toys captured the American imagination quite like Cabbage Patch Kids. These soft-bodied dolls with distinctive round faces, yarn hair, and unique names came with adoption certificates, making children feel they were adopting rather than just buying a toy. Introduced nationally in 1983, they sparked an unprecedented craze. Parents lined up for hours, sometimes days, hoping to secure dolls before they sold out. News footage showed adults literally fighting in toy store aisles to grab the last dolls. Each Cabbage Patch Kid was marketed as unique, with different facial features, hair colors, and clothing, which increased their collectability. The combination of clever marketing, artificial scarcity, and genuine appeal to children created perfect storm conditions for a toy phenomenon. At their peak, Cabbage Patch Kids were impossible to find in stores, leading to a black market where dolls sold for many times their retail price. The craze eventually cooled, but the Cabbage Patch phenomenon demonstrated the power of toy marketing and America's willingness to go to extraordinary lengths to give children what they wanted, especially during the holidays. Transformers and action figures. Action figures in the 1980s became more than simple toys. They became multimedia franchises with cartoons, comic books, and extensive product lines. Transformers, introduced in 1984, featured robots that could transform into vehicles, weapons, or animals. The toys came with detailed backstories about Autobots and Decepticons battling for control of their home planet and Earth. An animated series and later a feature film expanded the mythology, creating devoted fans who collected figures and followed the ongoing narrative. G.I. Joe similarly combined action figures with storytelling through comics and cartoons, featuring military heroes battling the evil Cobra organization. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe offered fantasy adventures, while Thundercats provided science fiction action. These toy lines succeeded by creating complete universes that children could explore through play. The toys weren't just objects but characters with names, personalities, and roles in larger stories. Marketing to children through cartoons was controversial. Critics argued it blurred entertainment and advertising, but the strategy was undeniably effective. Boys' bedrooms filled with action figures arranged in elaborate battle scenes, and playgrounds buzzed with debates about which characters would win in fights. Nintendo Entertainment System games. The Nintendo Entertainment System, NES, released in North America in 1985, didn't just revive the video game industry. It created cultural touchstones that defined childhood for a generation. Super Mario Bros., the pack-in game with many consoles, introduced players to Mario and Luigi's quest to rescue Princess Peach from Bowser. Its side-scrolling levels, precise controls, and hidden secrets kept players engaged for hours. The Legend of Zelda offered exploration and adventure, with players guiding Link through a vast fantasy world. The game's battery-powered save feature was revolutionary, allowing progress to be saved without starting over each time. Metroid provided atmospheric sci-fi action, while Mega Man delivered challenging boss battles. These games shared certain qualities: tight gameplay mechanics, increasing difficulty that rewarded skill, and design that encouraged exploration and experimentation. Children developed hand-eye coordination while learning persistence. Games were hard, and success required practice and pattern recognition. Playing video games became a social activity, with friends gathering to take turns, share secrets about hidden items, and compete for high scores. The NES proved that video games could offer experiences as rich and memorable as other forms of entertainment. My Little Pony and Girls' Toys. While action figures dominated boys' toy aisles, My Little Pony captured the hearts of many young girls starting in 1983. These small, colourful plastic ponies with flowing manes and tails, each adorned with a unique symbol on their flanks, encouraged imaginative play and collecting. The ponies had names like Twilight, Firefly, and Cotton Candy, and came with accessories like combs for styling their hair. The toy line expanded to include pony playsets, from stables to dream castles, creating an entire fantasy world. An animated television series and eventually a feature film told stories about friendship and adventure in Ponyland. Like many 1980s toy lines, My Little Pony succeeded by creating a universe that extended beyond the physical toys. Girls could watch the show, play with the toys, and exist in that imaginary world for hours. The emphasis on friendship, caring, and gentle adventures offered an alternative to more action-oriented entertainment. My Little Pony demonstrated the commercial potential of marketing specifically to girls with products that emphasized creativity, relationship building, and personal expression rather than competition or conflict. Board games and family game night. Despite the rise of video games, traditional board games remained a staple of family entertainment in the 1980s. Trivial Pursuit, introduced in 1981, became a phenomenon by turning general knowledge into competitive fun. Players answered questions across categories like geography, entertainment, and science and nature, collecting colored wedges as they progressed around the board. The game sparked a trivia craze and brought families together around kitchen tables for hours of play. Other games maintained popularity. Monopoly continued its decades-long dominance, teaching children about property, money management, and the sometimes cutthroat nature of capitalism. Scrabble challenged vocabulary and spelling. Newer games like Pictionary, where players drew clues for teammates to guess, added creative and social elements. Board games offered screen-free entertainment that brought generations together. Parents, children, and grandparents could compete on relatively equal footing, with knowledge and luck playing larger roles than age or physical ability. Game night became a ritual in many households, a time when televisions were turned off and families interacted face-to-face, laughing, strategizing, and creating memories that endured long after the game pieces were put away. The fitness craze. Americans in the 1980s became obsessed with fitness in ways previous generations hadn't experienced. Aerobics classes, led by enthusiastic instructors, shouting encouragement over pounding music, filled gymnasiums and community centers. Jane Fonda's workout videos became bestsellers, bringing aerobics into living rooms nationwide. Jogging evolved from a niche activity to a mainstream form of exercise, with Americans of all ages donning running shoes and hitting the pavement. Health clubs expanded rapidly, offering not just basic equipment but classes, personal trainers, and social atmospheres. The fitness movement reflected multiple cultural currents: growing health, awareness, emphasis on personal appearance and youth, and the broader self-improvement ethos of the decade. Fitness became associated with discipline, success, and taking control of one's life. Athletic wear transitioned from purely functional to fashionable, with people wearing workout clothes as casual wear. Marathons grew in popularity, with major city races attracting thousands of participants. The fitness craze wasn't universal. Plenty of Americans remained sedentary, but it established exercise as an expected part of middle-class lifestyle and set patterns that continue today. Microwave ovens become standard. The microwave oven transformed from a luxury item to a kitchen necessity during the 1980s. In 1980, only about 20% of American homes had microwaves, but by 1990, that number exceeded 80%. Prices dropped as manufacturing improved and competition increased, making microwaves affordable for middle-class families. The appliance promised convenience. Food that took an hour in a conventional oven could be ready in minutes. Microwave popcorn became a phenomenon. Insert the bag, press a button, and enjoy fresh popcorn minutes later. Frozen dinners evolved from aluminum tray TV dinners to microwave-friendly plastic containers, with separate compartments for different foods. Cookbooks dedicated to microwave cooking appeared. Though results were mixed, some foods worked wonderfully while others turned rubbery or unevenly heated. The microwave particularly appealed to two-income families and single people who wanted quick meals without extensive preparation. It symbolized the broader acceleration of American life and the premium placed on convenience. Critics worried about nutrition and the loss of traditional cooking, but the microwave's convenience proved irresistible. Having a microwave became standard, fundamentally changing how Americans approached meal preparation. Shopping malls as social centers. The shopping mall reached its peak cultural significance during the 1980s, evolving beyond mere retail spaces into social and cultural centers. Large enclosed malls with climate-controlled environments, fountains, and food courts became destinations where Americans spent hours, not just shopping but socializing. Teenagers especially embraced malls as gathering places somewhere to go on Friday nights, hang out with friends, see and be seen. The mall offered a safe, parent-approved environment with entertainment options, movie theaters, video arcades, music stores where you could listen to albums before buying, and bookstores with comfortable chairs. Window shopping itself became entertainment, browsing stores even without intention to buy. Malls hosted community events, from holiday celebrations to charity fundraisers. The food court provided variety: Chinese food, pizza, burgers, ice cream, all under one roof. Department stores anchored the malls, with smaller specialty shops filling the spaces between. The mall represented consumer culture in concentrated form, a temple to shopping where purchasing products was intertwined with leisure and social identity. For many suburban Americans, the mall was the closest thing to a town square, a communal space where different segments of the community intersected. The rise of fast food. Fast food chains expanded dramatically during the 1980s, becoming increasingly central to American eating habits. McDonald's, already dominant, continued growing while chains like Burger King, Wendy's, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and Kentucky Fried Chicken competed aggressively for market share. These restaurants offered speed, consistency, and low prices, important considerations for busy families and budget-conscious consumers. The drive-through window became standard, allowing customers to order and receive food without leaving their cars. Fast food transcended simple convenience to become cultural shorthand. Happy Meals with toys hooked children, making McDonald's a family destination. The Whopper versus Big Mac debate became playground discussion. Fast food chains advertised heavily, creating memorable mascots and slogans that embedded themselves in American consciousness. The industry's growth reflected broader changes. More women working outside the home meant less time for cooking, changing family dynamics, and the acceleration of daily life. Critics raised concerns about nutrition, particularly as childhood obesity began rising, but fast food's convenience and affordability made it an ingrained part of American culture. Eating fast food regularly became normalized rather than occasional, fundamentally altering the American diet and relationship with food. Credit cards become ubiquitous. The 1980s saw credit cards transition from special-use financial tools to everyday payment methods carried by most Americans. Credit card companies marketed aggressively, offering pre-approved cards through mail solicitations. Having multiple credit cards became common, with wallets containing Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, and various store cards. The convenience was obvious: no need to carry large amounts of cash, ability to make large purchases and pay over time, and consumer protections that cash couldn't offer. Retailers increasingly preferred credit cards for their speed and security. ATM cards, often combined with debit functionality, also proliferated, allowing 24-hour access to cash and electronic payments. This shift toward plastic money changed consumer behavior. The psychological barrier of handing over physical cash disappeared, potentially making spending feel less real. Credit card debt increased as Americans became comfortable carrying balances and paying interest. The minimum monthly payment structure made large purchases seem affordable, even when the total cost was beyond immediate means. Financial advisors warned about debt accumulation, but the convenience and widespread acceptance of credit cards made them almost necessary for modern life. The cashless society, still not fully realized, began taking shape during this decade. Latchkey kids and changing family structures. The term latchkey kids described children who came home from school to empty houses because both parents worked or in single-parent households where the parent worked. This phenomenon grew significantly during the 1980s, as economic pressures and social changes increased the number of two-income families. These children carried house keys, let themselves in after school, and spent hours unsupervised until parents returned from work. They prepared their own snacks, did homework independently, and sometimes cared for younger siblings. The situation sparked debates about child welfare, parental responsibility, and economic necessity. Critics worried about children's safety and emotional well-being, while others noted that many children developed independence and self-reliance. After-school programs emerged to address the situation, though they weren't universally available or affordable. Television networks created programming for these unsupervised hours, and microwave ovens offered a safe way for children to heat food. The latchkey kid phenomenon reflected broader transformation in American family life, work culture, and childhood itself. While some viewed it as neglect, others saw children successfully adapting to new family realities, gaining competencies that earlier generations developed differently. Yuppies and conspicuous consumption. The term yuppie, young urban professional, became cultural shorthand in the 1980s for a particular demographic and lifestyle. Yuppies were typically college-educated, aged 25 to 40, working in professional fields like law, business, or finance, living in cities or upscale suburbs, and earning significant incomes. They were characterized by conspicuous consumption. Expensive cars, BMWs, became almost stereotypical. Designer clothes, gourmet food, imported wines, and the latest electronics. Yuppies frequented trendy restaurants, renovated urban lofts, and invested in real estate and stock markets. They embodied the decade's material success and entrepreneurial spirit, but also attracted criticism for perceived shallowness, selfishness, and materialism. The yuppie lifestyle emphasized career achievement and acquisition of status symbols over social consciousness or community involvement. Terms like networking and power lunch became associated with yuppie culture. Television shows like 30-something explored their lives and anxieties. Not everyone who fit the demographic embraced the label. Many rejected what they saw as excessive materialism. Nonetheless, yuppies influenced consumer trends, urban development, and cultural attitudes. They represented a generation pursuing personal success and material comfort with single-minded focus, reflecting broader cultural values of the 1980s, while also provoking questions about what constituted a meaningful life. Answering machine culture. The widespread adoption of answering machines in the 1980s created new social protocols and awkwardness. Recording an outgoing message became an art form. Some kept it simple and professional, others tried for humor or creativity. Screening calls became possible. You could hear who was calling before deciding whether to pick up, though this risked social awkwardness if someone knew you were home. Leaving messages required new etiquette. How long should a message be? How much detail? Should you leave your number even if the person should already have it? The beep that signaled recording time created pressure to speak concisely and clearly. People sometimes rehearsed messages before calling, and messing up a message with no way to delete it and try again could be mortifying. The technology enabled asynchronous communication. You could talk to someone without actual conversation. Some people hated talking to machines and refused to leave messages, while others left elaborate, rambling messages. Returning home to a blinking light indicating messages, waiting created anticipation. Who called? Was it good news or bad? The answering machine occupied a peculiar space between convenience and intrusion, fundamentally changing how Americans communicated and maintained relationships across distance and time. Blockbuster video and movie rentals. Video rental stores became neighborhood fixtures during the 1980s, with Blockbuster Video, founded in 1985, eventually dominating the industry. These stores stocked thousands of VHS tapes organized by genre, allowing families to browse and rent movies for home viewing. Friday nights often included trips to the video store to select weekend entertainment. Browsing the aisles, reading box covers, and debating which movies to rent became its own form of entertainment. New releases were highly sought after, often requiring reservations or arriving early. Rental fees typically ranged from $2 for several days, making it economical compared to movie theaters for families. The video store experience introduced concerns about age-appropriate content, as children could see adult movie covers, leading stores to create separate sections. Late fees, charged when customers didn't return movies on time, became a significant revenue source and source of frustration. Video rental changed movie consumption patterns. People could watch at their convenience, pause for snacks or bathroom breaks, and re-watch favorite scenes. It also created opportunities to see older films or independent movies that never played locally. The video rental store represented the democratization of film access, though it would eventually be disrupted by streaming technology decades later. The self-help movement. Americans in the 1980s enthusiastically embraced self-help books, seminars, and programs, promising personal transformation and success. Books like The 1-Minute Manager, In Search of Excellence, and How to Win Friends and Influence People, a reissue of a 1930s classic, became bestsellers. Self-help gurus conducted expensive seminars, teaching everything from business success to personal relationships. The movement reflected several cultural currents: belief in individual agency and self-improvement, desire for success in competitive environments, and perhaps underlying anxiety about rapid social and economic changes. Self-help promised that with the right techniques, anyone could achieve success, happiness, or fulfillment. Topics ranged from time management and leadership to finding inner peace and improving relationships. Critics dismissed much of it as pop psychology or common sense, repackaged and sold at premium prices. They worried about the movement's implicit message that personal problems had individual solutions rather than systemic causes. Nonetheless, millions of Americans invested time and money in self-improvement, attending seminars, reading books, and applying techniques to their lives. The self-help movement revealed Americans' optimistic belief in personal transformation and their willingness to seek guidance in navigating increasingly complex lives. It established patterns of consumer behavior around personal development that continue today. Theme parks expand. The 1980s saw American theme parks expand and innovate, creating immersive entertainment experiences that attracted millions of visitors. Disney parks in California and Florida continued drawing families, but this decade saw them adding new attractions like Epcot Center, which opened in 1982 as a permanent World's Fair celebrating human achievement and international culture. Universal Studios opened theme parks, offering behind-the-scenes looks at movie-making alongside thrilling rides. Regional parks like Six Flags locations added bigger, faster roller coasters, engaging in an arms race for the tallest, fastest, or most inversions. Water parks emerged as a category, offering relief from summer heat with wave pools and water slides. Theme parks became multi-day destination vacations rather than day trips, with surrounding hotels, restaurants, and shops creating complete resort experiences. Admission prices increased significantly, but families saved for years to visit, considering it a worthy investment in memories. The parks employed thousands, many in seasonal jobs that became rites of passage for teenagers. Lines for popular attractions could stretch hours, but the excitement and anticipation were part of the experience. Theme parks represented American entertainment culture, writ large, commercial, optimistic, technological, and dedicated to the proposition that happiness could be engineered and purchased. Mobile phones emerge. Barely. Mobile phones existed in the 1980s, but calling them mobile was generous. They were better described as portable, and barely that. The first commercial mobile phones were large, heavy devices nicknamed brick phones for their size and weight. The Motorola Dynatac 8000X, approved for commercial use in 1983, weighed about 2 pounds, offered just 30 minutes of talk time, and cost nearly $4,000. Mobile phone service was expensive, hundreds of dollars monthly for limited minutes. Consequently, Mobile phones were status symbols for wealthy business people, not practical tools for average Americans. Users were often spotted talking on these oversized phones while walking down streets or sitting in restaurants, making clear statements about their importance and means. The phones worked on analog cellular networks with limited coverage, particularly outside major cities. Call quality was often poor, and dropped calls were common. Despite limitations, the technology represented a significant step toward the connected future. Most Americans still relied entirely on landlines and payphones when away from home, but mobile phones proved the concept's viability. They were luxury items and novelties in the 1980s, but they hinted at the communication revolution that would transform society in coming decades. Preppy culture and country clubs. Beyond just fashion, preppy described an entire lifestyle and aesthetic that gained visibility during the 1980s. The preppy ideal drew from traditions of northeastern private schools and Ivy League universities, emphasizing good breeding, education, and refined taste. Country clubs, tennis clubs, and yacht clubs served as gathering places for the upper middle and upper classes. These establishments offered not just sports facilities but social networking, exclusivity, and status. Membership often required substantial initiation fees and ongoing dues, plus informal requirements like sponsorship from existing members. Within these environments, business deals were discussed over golf rounds, marriages were formed through children who met at club events, and social hierarchies were maintained and reinforced. For those outside these circles, country clubs represented either aspiration or exclusion, depending on perspective. The preppy lifestyle valued tradition, discretion, and old money aesthetics over flashy displays of wealth, though this was somewhat ironic given the 1980s broader materialism. Books like The Official Preppy Handbook both celebrated and gently mocked the culture. While only a minority of Americans directly participated in country club culture, its influence on fashion, language, and aspirational imagery reached much broader audiences through media and advertising. Suburban expansion continues. American suburbs continued expanding outward during the 1980s, as families sought affordable housing, good schools, and safe neighborhoods. Developers built sprawling subdivisions on former farmland, creating communities of similar-looking homes with yards, cul-de-sacs, and neighborhood pools or parks. The pattern followed established templates: residential areas separate from commercial zones, requiring cars for virtually all errands and activities. Shopping centers, often anchored by malls, served these communities. Suburban schools often had better resources than urban counterparts, attracting families with children. Critics noted suburban sprawl's environmental costs, increased car dependency, cultural homogeneity, and contribution to urban decline as tax bases eroded. Supporters emphasized safety, space, property ownership opportunities, and quality of life improvements. Suburban living represented the American dream for many: home ownership, good schools, safe streets where children could play, and distance from urban problems. The suburbs developed their own culture: soccer games, block parties, homeowners associations, and strip malls. Commuting times increased as people lived farther from work, but many considered this acceptable trade-off for suburban benefits. The 1980s suburbs were predominantly white and middle class, though diversity gradually increased. Suburban expansion shaped American life profoundly, influencing everything from retail patterns to political attitudes, and establishing settlement patterns that would define metropolitan areas for decades. The war on drugs. The 1980s saw an intensification of anti-drug efforts under the banner of the War on Drugs. First Lady Nancy Reagan's Just Say No campaign became the public face of drug prevention efforts, targeting young people with messages about drug dangers. The campaign appeared in schools, television programs, and public service announcements, encouraging children to refuse drugs and report drug use. Meanwhile, law enforcement efforts expanded dramatically. The Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986 established mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenses, with particularly harsh penalties for crack cocaine, compared to powder cocaine disparities that disproportionately affected minority communities. Drug Abuse Resistance Education (DARE) programs placed police officers in schools to teach drug prevention. The media featured stories about crack cocaine's spread in American cities, sometimes using sensationalized language that increased public fear. Incarceration rates rose sharply as more people received prison sentences for drug offenses, Critics argued the approach criminalized addiction rather than treating it as a health issue, and that enforcement disproportionately targeted minority communities, while doing little to reduce drug availability or use. Supporters maintained that strong deterrence was necessary to combat drug trafficking and protect communities. The war on drugs significantly impacted criminal justice policy, prison populations, and affected communities, with consequences still being debated today. Homelessness becomes visible. American cities in the 1980s saw increasing numbers of homeless individuals living on streets, in parks, and in shelters. Multiple factors contributed: deinstitutionalization of mental health patients without adequate community support, loss of affordable housing as urban areas gentrified, cuts to social welfare programs, rising housing costs, and economic difficulties. Despite overall growth, homeless populations became more visible in downtown areas, subway stations, and public spaces. The issue sparked debates about causes and solutions. Some emphasized personal responsibility and substance abuse, while others pointed to structural economic factors and insufficient social services. Shelters expanded but couldn't meet demand, particularly during winter months. Cities struggled to balance compassion for homeless individuals with businesses and residents' concerns about public spaces. Volunteer organizations, often faith-based, provided meals, clothing, and services. The AIDS crisis particularly affected homeless populations who had limited healthcare access. Media coverage alternated between sympathetic features highlighting individual stories and reports treating homelessness as a public nuisance. The visibility of homelessness in prosperous 1980s America created cognitive dissonance. How could such wealth and poverty coexist? The question prompted some action but no comprehensive solutions, and homelessness remained a persistent urban challenge. Japanese economic competition. American industries in the 1980s faced intense competition from Japan, which had rebuilt its post-World War II economy into a manufacturing powerhouse. Japanese automobile manufacturers Toyota, Honda, Nissan gained significant American market share by offering reliable, fuel-efficient vehicles that challenged Detroit's traditional dominance. American car companies struggled to compete, leading to plant closures and job losses in the industrial Midwest. Japanese electronics, televisions, VCRs, stereos, cameras were often considered superior in quality and innovation to American products. This economic competition sparked various reactions. Some Americans bought Japanese products appreciatively, recognizing quality and value. Others felt resentment, seeing Japanese success as threatening American economic security and workers' livelihoods. Trade tensions increased, with debates about fair practices, currency manipulation, and market access. Some American responses turned ugly, with isolated incidents of anti-Japanese violence, most notably the 1982 killing of Vincent Chin in Detroit by auto workers who blamed Japan for industry troubles. More constructively, American manufacturers studied Japanese production methods like just-in-time inventory and quality circles, attempting to adopt practices that made Japanese competitors successful. The economic competition forced American industries to confront complacency and inefficiency while raising questions about globalization, trade policy, and economic nationalism that remain relevant today. Infomercials and cable advertising. Late-night television in the 1980s introduced a new advertising format, the infomercial. These long-form commercials, typically 30 minutes, presented products as though they were regular television programs, complete with hosts, demonstrations, customer testimonials, and studio audiences. Products ranged from kitchen gadgets and cleaning supplies to real estate courses and self-help programs. Infomercials use psychological techniques, artificial scarcity, operators are standing by, bonus items. But wait, there's more. And payment plans to make expensive items seem affordable. The format thrived on cable television, which offered more airtime to fill and looser regulations than broadcast networks. Some products became cultural phenomena: the Ginsu knife, the clapper, the chia pet, known as much for their advertising as their functionality. Critics viewed infomercials as manipulative, targeting vulnerable populations late at night or during daytime hours when elderly viewers or unemployed individuals might be watching. Others saw them as harmless entertainment and legitimate commerce. Infomercials represented cable television's commercial maturation and demonstrated that advertising itself could be content. The format succeeded by blurring the line between entertainment and sales pitch. creating a new revenue stream that helped finance cable's expansion. Running and marathon culture distance. Running transformed from fringe activity to mainstream pursuit during the 1980s. Major city marathons, New York, Boston, Chicago, saw participation numbers soar as running became democratized. These weren't just elite athletes but ordinary Americans of various ages and fitness levels, challenging themselves to complete 26.2 miles. Running clubs formed in communities nationwide, providing social support and training partners. Specialty running stores opened, offering professional fitting services and shoes designed for different foot types and running styles. Running magazines provided training advice, nutrition guidance, and inspiration. The sport attracted people for various reasons: weight loss, stress management, social connection, personal challenge, or simply the runner's high. Running required minimal equipment and could be done almost anywhere, making it accessible regardless of income. However, serious runners invested in quality shoes, running clothes, race entry fees, and sometimes travel to destination marathons. The running boom reflected broader fitness consciousness and the desire for individual achievement. Finishing a marathon became a bucket list accomplishment, a way to prove something to oneself. The sport also revealed competitive streaks. Runners tracked personal records, compared race times, and pushed for improvements. Running culture emphasized both individual achievement and community support, creating social networks bound by shared suffering and triumph. Cable news and media fragmentation. CNN's success spawned imitators and competitors, fragmenting news consumption in ways that presaged future media landscapes. While broadcast network evening news remained popular, cable news offered alternatives. CNN's comprehensive coverage attracted viewers who wanted more depth or couldn't watch at traditional news times. The network's growth proved 24-hour news could be commercially viable. This success attracted competition and established a pattern where media audiences fragmented across multiple sources rather than gathering around a few common channels. Different news sources began developing distinct identities and attracting specific audiences. The implications weren't fully apparent in the 1980s, but the foundation was being laid for a media environment where Americans increasingly consumed news from different sources, potentially seeing events through different frames and developing different understandings of reality. The evening network news anchors Tom Brokaw, Peter Jennings, Dan Rather remained influential and prestigious, but their monopoly was weakening. Cable news represented just one aspect of media fragmentation that included specialty cable channels, radio talk shows, and early online services. The shared common experience of previous generations, where most Americans watched the same shows and received news from the same sources, was beginning to dissolve. The rise of talk radio, AM radio, found new life in the 1980s through talk radio formats. As music migrated to FM stations with better sound quality, AM stations increasingly featured talk programming, news, interviews, call-in shows, and opinion commentary. The format proved popular and profitable, attracting listeners during drive times and throughout the day. Some hosts focused on local issues, taking calls from community members and discussing regional concerns. Others addressed national politics, offering partisan perspectives that appealed to specific audiences. Rush Limbaugh, who went into national syndication in 1988, became particularly influential, pioneering conservative talk radio with entertainment-focused political commentary. Talk radio provided a platform for voices, often absent from mainstream media, and created communities of regular listeners who felt connected to hosts and fellow callers. The format was interactive in ways traditional media wasn't. Listeners could call in, express opinions, and sometimes have extended conversations on air. Critics worried about the quality of discourse, the spread of misinformation, and the polarizing effect of partisan programming. Supporters valued the diversity of perspectives and the democratic aspect of ordinary citizens having voices. Talk radio fragmented audiences ideologically, allowing people to seek out programming that confirmed existing beliefs. The medium influenced politics by mobilizing listeners around issues and candidates, establishing patterns that intensified with the internet. Aerobics classes and Jane Fonda group exercise classes, particularly aerobics, became social phenomena in the 1980s. Gymnasia, community centers, and dedicated aerobics studios offered classes where participants exercised together to energetic music. Instructors, often on elevated platforms, led participants through routines, combining dance moves, jumping jacks, leg lifts, and stretching. The classes provided structured workouts, motivation through group energy, and social interaction. Jane Fonda's workout videos, beginning with her 1982 workout, brought aerobics into homes. Her videos became bestsellers, making home exercise accessible and acceptable. Fonda, a controversial figure due to her Vietnam War activism, reinvented herself as a fitness guru, demonstrating that exercise could be enjoyable and empowering. The aerobics aesthetic leotards, tights, leg warmers, headbands, and wristbands became iconic of the decade. High-impact aerobics, which involved significant jumping, eventually gave way to low-impact variations as concerns about joint stress emerged. Step aerobics, using raised platforms, appeared late in the decade. The aerobics movement encouraged women's fitness participation in ways that weightlifting or traditional gym activities hadn't. It made exercise social and fun rather than solitary and grim. The phenomenon reflected changing attitudes about women's bodies, health consciousness, and the integration of fitness into lifestyle, rather than just athletic training. Video game arcades peak. Before home consoles became dominant, video game arcades were social destinations for young Americans. These darkened rooms, filled with flashing screens and electronic sounds, offered dozens of games, requiring only quarters to play. Games like Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Galaga, and Street Fighter attracted crowds. Skilled players drew audiences as they achieved high scores or made deep runs on single quarters. Arcades developed social hierarchies based on gaming skill, with the best players earning respect and sometimes recording high scores with three-letter initials visible to all future players. Arcades appeared in shopping malls, movie theaters, and standalone locations. They attracted primarily teenagers and young adults, becoming hangout spaces where social dynamics played out alongside gaming. Some arcades developed reputations as rough or sketchy places where unsupervised youth got into trouble, while others maintained family-friendly atmospheres. The sensory experience, darkness, flashing lights, electronic music, the click of buttons and joysticks, created an immersive environment distinct from anywhere else. However, arcade popularity peaked mid-decade as home consoles improved. Why spend quarters at arcades when you could play at home indefinitely? Arcades didn't disappear immediately, but the shift had begun. The arcade's golden age represented a brief moment when gaming was primarily public and social rather than private and domestic. New wave and synth-pop musical styles evolved significantly during the 1980s, with new wave and synth-pop representing departures from traditional rock instruments. These genres emphasized synthesizers, drum machines, and electronic sounds over guitars and acoustic drums. British bands like Depeche Mode, Duran Duran, and the Human League found American success with catchy melodies and futuristic production. The music paired naturally with MTV, as these bands created visually striking videos that matched their modern sound. Fashion was integral. The new wave aesthetic featured bold colors, unusual haircuts, makeup for men, and avant-garde styling that contrasted with the blue jeans and t-shirts of traditional rock. The music appealed particularly to young, urban audiences, interested in something different from mainstream rock or emerging hip-hop. New wave represented postmodern playfulness, irony, artificiality, and surface over depth, reflecting broader cultural trends. The genre's electronic instruments and production techniques influenced popular music permanently, establishing sounds and approaches that remain relevant. Some critics dismissed the music as superficial or overly commercial, while fans appreciated its energy, innovation, and refusal to take itself too seriously. The genre also provided entry points for female artists and LGBTQ performers who found acceptance in new wave's embrace of difference. The music created a soundtrack for the 1980s that captured the decade's fascination with technology, style, and new possibilities. The growth of evangelical Christianity. The 1980s witnessed increasing visibility and political influence of evangelical Christianity in American public life. Televangelists like Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, and Jim Bakker reached millions through television programs, building ministries and media empires. Falwell's Moral Majority, founded in 1979, became politically active during the decade, mobilizing conservative Christians around issues like abortion, school prayer, and traditional family values. The religious right became an important Republican constituency, helping elect Ronald Reagan and influencing policy debates. Megachurches grew in suburbs, offering contemporary worship, extensive programming, and community beyond traditional Sunday services. Christian bookstores, music, and media expanded into a substantial subculture. The evangelical movement emphasized personal salvation, biblical authority, and often socially conservative positions. However, scandals involving televangelists, Jim Bakker's financial improprieties and sexual misconduct, Jimmy Swaggart's moral failures damaged credibility and provided fodder for critics. Nonetheless, evangelical Christianity's influence on American politics and culture increased significantly during the decade. The movement represented reaction against perceived moral decline and secularization, asserting that Christian values should inform public policy. This development reshaped American politics, creating coalitions and divisions that remain influential. The visible success of religious broadcasting demonstrated religion's adaptability to modern media and marketing techniques. Corporate mergers and acquisitions. The business world in the 1980s experienced a wave of corporate mergers, acquisitions, and leveraged buyouts that transformed American capitalism. Investment bankers and corporate raiders bought companies using borrowed money, often restructuring or breaking them apart for profit. Deals worth billions of dollars became common. Names like Michael Milken, who pioneered high-yield junk bonds that financed many acquisitions, and corporate raiders like Carl Icahn became well known. The activity created fortunes for successful deal-makers, but often resulted in job losses, as acquired companies were restructured for efficiency or profit extraction. The term hostile takeover entered common vocabulary, describing acquisitions opposed by target company management. Some viewed this merger mania as capitalism's vitality, inefficient companies being improved through market discipline. Others saw greed and short-term thinking destroying stable companies and communities. The film Wall Street, 1987, captured the era's spirit with Gordon Gekko's infamous "Greed is good" speech. Though whether this was critique or celebration remained debated. The merger wave reflected broader deregulation trends, availability of financing, and cultural acceptance of aggressive profit-seeking. The phenomenon changed corporate America, favoring financial engineering over long-term building, and creating anxiety among workers whose jobs depended on corporate stability. The decade's business culture emphasized deals, leverage, and returns over loyalty or tradition. Personal computers and desktop publishing. Personal computers began revolutionizing not just how people worked, but what they could produce. Desktop publishing software, particularly programs like PageMaker introduced in 1985, combined with laser printers to enable individuals and small businesses to create professional-looking documents previously requiring commercial print shops. Newsletters, flyers, brochures, and even small magazines could be designed on computers and printed locally. This democratized publishing, lowering barriers to entry for small publishers and giving organizations in-house capabilities they'd never had. The Apple Macintosh, with its graphical user interface and mouse, became particularly popular for creative work. Designers appreciated its visual approach compared to text-based DOS systems. The combination of computer, software, and laser printer cost several $1,000s, but was still far less than professional typesetting and printing. Quality couldn't match commercial printing, but for many purposes, it was adequate. Desktop publishing represented a broader pattern, where computers empowered individuals and small organizations to perform tasks previously requiring specialists or expensive services. The technology threatened traditional printing industry jobs while creating opportunities for those who mastered new tools. As with many technological changes, the impact was mixed, increased accessibility and flexibility, but also pressure on established industries and workers. Day trading and financial deregulation. Financial markets in the 1980s underwent significant deregulation, changing how Americans invested and how financial institutions operated. Discount brokers like Charles Schwab offered lower commissions than traditional full-service brokers, making stock trading more accessible. Some individuals began actively trading stocks, attempting to profit from short-term price movements rather than long-term investing. Technology improvements allowed faster trade execution and better information access, though nothing like the internet age to come. The stock market experienced significant growth through much of the decade, encouraging participation and creating wealth for many investors. However, October 1987 brought Black Monday, when the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 22.6% in a single day, the largest one-day percentage decline in history. The crash wiped out paper wealth and terrified investors, though markets eventually recovered. Financial deregulation. including the phasing out of restrictions, separating commercial and investment banking, allowed institutions new opportunities, but also new risks. Critics later argued that excessive deregulation contributed to instability, while supporters credited it with innovation and growth. Individual retirement accounts, IRAs, and 401 plans grew in popularity, shifting retirement funding from traditional pensions to individual investment accounts. This transfer of risk from employers to employees marked a fundamental change in American retirement planning, with long-term consequences still playing out today. Camcorders and home videos. The introduction of consumer camcorders in the 1980s allowed families to create home videos with unprecedented ease. Earlier home movie systems used film, requiring expensive processing and producing silent images. Camcorders recorded directly to VHS tapes, or competing formats like Betamax, offering immediate playback with sound. Families documented birthdays, vacations, holidays, and everyday moments, creating visual records of their lives. The technology wasn't cheap. Early camcorders cost over $1,000, but prices dropped as competition increased. The devices were bulky and heavy compared to modern standards, resting on shoulders during filming. Home videos had distinctive aesthetic qualities: shaky footage, poor lighting, automatic focus, hunting for subjects, and sometimes embarrassing moments captured unintentionally. Families watched these videos together, reliving memories and laughing at awkward moments. The technology changed family documentation, making moving images accessible rather than just still photographs. Some worried about privacy. What once would have been private family moments now existed on tape that could potentially be shared or copied. The camcorder represented another step in technology's democratization, giving ordinary people tools previously available only to professionals. It also meant future generations would have richer historical records of their ancestors, though whether those records would prove more valuable than imagination and stories remained an open question. The farm crisis. While urban and suburban America experienced economic growth during parts of the 1980s, rural agricultural regions faced severe hardship. Farmers who had borrowed heavily during the 1970s to expand operations, encouraged by high commodity prices and rising land values, faced disaster when the economy shifted. Interest rates spiked, land values crashed, and commodity prices fell, creating a perfect storm. Farmers couldn't make loan payments, leading to foreclosures and bankruptcies. Entire farming communities suffered as agricultural support businesses failed alongside farms. Family farms that had been operated for generations were lost. The crisis caused immense personal suffering, depression, divorce, and in some cases, suicide among farmers facing financial ruin. Rural banks that had lent to farmers also failed. The crisis sparked protests, with farmers driving tractors to Washington to demand relief. Farm aid concerts, organized by Willie Nelson and other musicians, raised awareness and funds. The government eventually provided some assistance, but not before many farms were lost. The farm crisis represented broader economic transformations: agriculture's consolidation into larger operations, globalization's impact on commodity prices, and rural America's declining economic and political influence. The crisis left scars on rural communities and contributed to urban-rural divides in American society that persist today. MTV Music Awards. Begin MTV, having established itself as a cultural force, launched the MTV Video Music Awards in 1984, creating an annual ceremony celebrating music videos as an art form. Unlike traditional music awards focusing on recordings, the VMAs recognized categories like Best Video, Best Director, and Best Choreography, treating music videos as complete works. The inaugural ceremony featured memorable moments, establishing the VMA's reputation for unpredictability and spectacle. The awards quickly became must-watch television for young audiences, with performances often more anticipated than the awards themselves. Artists used the platform for provocative performances and fashion statements. Madonna's Like a Virgin performance at the 1984 VMAs, where she emerged from a wedding cake and rolled around on stage, became iconic. The VMAs reflected MTV's influence. Music videos weren't just promotional tools but cultural products deserving recognition. The show's loose, unpredictable atmosphere contrasted with the staid Grammy Awards, appealing to MTV's young audience. Winners received Moon Man trophies, referencing MTV's moon landing imagery. The VMAs became part of pop culture conversation, generating headlines and water cooler discussions. They demonstrated how MTV had not just changed music consumption but created new standards for what music success looked like. Compact cars gain acceptance. American automobiles traditionally favored size and power, but the 1980s saw compact cars gain market acceptance. Japanese manufacturers led the way with fuel-efficient models like the Honda Civic and Toyota Corolla. American automakers responded with their own compacts, the Ford Escort, Chevrolet Cavalier, and Dodge Aries. These smaller cars offered better gas mileage than traditional sedans, important after oil crises and with gas prices fluctuating. Compact cars were also less expensive, appealing to budget-conscious consumers and young people buying their first cars. Initially, some Americans resisted, viewing small cars as unsafe, uncomfortable, or somehow un-American. But reliability, economy, and improving build quality gradually won converts. Compact cars' success reflected Americans' growing pragmatism about transportation vehicles as tools for getting from place to place rather than status symbols. The shift also indicated American automakers' adaptation to competition and changing consumer preferences, though Detroit continued favoring larger, more profitable vehicles when possible. By decade's end, compact cars were established market segments rather than niche products, permanently changing America's automotive landscape and contributing to the overall downsizing of vehicles. Swatch watches and fashion accessories. Wristwatches in the 1980s underwent transformation from purely functional timepieces to fashion accessories, exemplified by Swatch. The Swiss brand, launched in 1983, produced colorful, playful, affordable watches designed as style statements rather than just timekeeping devices. Swatches came in countless designs, from simple and elegant to wild and artistic. The company released limited editions and collaborated with artists, making collecting swatches a hobby for some enthusiasts. Priced around $30, they were impulse purchases, and many people owned multiple swatches, matching watches to outfits or moods. The brand's success demonstrated that even utilitarian objects could be reimagined as fashion. Other accessories followed similar patterns. Sunglasses became fashion statements beyond sun protection, with brands like Ray-Ban gaining popularity, partly through placement in films like Risky Business and Top Gun. Athletic shoes transitioned from purely functional to fashion items with Nike, Reebok, and Adidas competing not just on performance but style. This accessorizing trend reflected the decade's emphasis on image and personal branding. How you looked mattered, and careful attention to details communicated something about identity, taste, and awareness of trends. Reading Rainbow and educational TV. Public television continued its educational mission during the 1980s, with programs like Reading Rainbow, which premiered in 1983. Hosted by LeVar Burton, the show encouraged children's literacy by featuring book readings, author interviews, and related explorations. Each episode focused on a particular book, brought to life through Burton's engaging narration and clever production. The show's theme song, Butterfly in the Sky, I Can Read Twice as High, became memorable for a generation. Reading Rainbow represented public television's commitment to educational programming that was both instructive and entertaining. Other educational shows like Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and 3-2-1 Contact continued programming aimed at children's development. These shows provided alternatives to the purely entertainment-focused cartoons dominating commercial television. Parents appreciated programming that taught while entertaining, and many children developed genuine love of reading through Reading Rainbow. The show won numerous awards and continued for over 2 decades. Educational television demonstrated that quality children's programming could exist outside commercial pressures, serving public interests rather than just selling toys or sugary cereals. The shows represented investments in children's futures, providing free educational resources accessible to families regardless of income. Wine coolers and light beer. Alcoholic beverage consumption patterns shifted during the 1980s with the introduction and popularity of wine coolers and light beer. Wine coolers, sweetened wine mixed with fruit juice and carbonation, appealed to consumers who found wine or beer too strong or bitter. Brands like Bartles and James and California Coolers marketed these drinks with folksy or sophisticated advertising. Wine coolers found particular popularity among women and younger drinkers, though this demographic targeting sometimes drew criticism. The drinks offered lower alcohol content than straight wine or spirits, positioning themselves as lighter, more social beverages. Light beer also gained market share, with brands like Miller Lite, Coors Light, and Bud Light, emphasizing fewer calories and lighter taste. Marketing emphasized that you could drink light beer without feeling as full or consuming as many calories, important to increasingly health-conscious consumers. The light beer wars featured memorable advertising campaigns, often emphasizing masculine activities like sports to counter perceptions that light beer wasn't serious drinking. Both wine coolers and light beer reflected broader trends toward moderation and health consciousness, even in categories like alcohol traditionally associated with indulgence. The drink's success showed that beverage companies could create new categories and change consumption patterns through clever marketing and product development. Stephen King and horror popularity. Horror fiction reached new commercial heights during the 1980s, with Stephen King becoming perhaps America's most popular author. King's prolific output included novels like Cujo, Pet Sematary, It, and Misery, many of which became successful films. His accessible writing style, ability to find horror in everyday situations, and well-developed characters attracted readers beyond traditional horror audiences. King's success spawned imitators and helped establish horror as a legitimate, commercially viable genre rather than just pulp fiction. The 1980s also saw horror films flourish, from slasher films like Friday the 13th and A Nightmare on Elm Street to more psychological horror. Some critics dismissed horror as exploitative or low-brow, but fans appreciated the genre's ability to explore fears and anxieties through metaphor and narrative. Horror provided catharsis, allowing audiences to experience fear in controlled environments. The genre's popularity perhaps reflected broader anxieties, Cold War fears, economic uncertainties, social changes channeled through supernatural or violent narratives. King's mainstream success demonstrated that genre fiction could achieve both commercial success and critical respect. His work influenced countless writers and filmmakers, establishing tropes and techniques that remain influential in horror storytelling. The Statue of Liberty restoration. In 1986, Americans celebrated the Statue of Liberty's centennial with a massive restoration project and Independence Day celebration. The statue, a gift from France that had stood in New York Harbor since 1886, had deteriorated significantly. The restoration involved replacing the torch, reinforcing internal structures, and cleaning exterior copper. The project cost over $80 million, funded largely through private donations coordinated by the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Foundation. Lee Iacocca, Chrysler CEO, led fundraising efforts. The restoration became a patriotic cause, with Americans contributing to preserve this symbol of immigration and freedom. The centennial celebration included a 4-day Liberty Weekend, with concerts, firework displays, and the unveiling of the restored statue. President Reagan spoke at ceremonies, connecting the statue to American values and identity. The event provided a moment of national pride and unity during the Cold War era. The restored Statue of Liberty, with its gleaming new torch, became a renewed symbol of American ideals. The project demonstrated Americans' connection to national symbols and willingness to invest in preserving them. It also reminded the country of its immigrant heritage, though debates about contemporary immigration policy were beginning to intensify. The restoration represented both looking backward to national origins and forward to maintaining symbols for future generations. Minivans transform family. Transportation Chrysler introduced the minivan in 1983 with the Dodge Caravan and Plymouth Voyager, creating a new vehicle category that transformed family transportation. Minivans offered more cargo space and passenger capacity than station wagons, while being easier to drive and park than full-size vans. They featured sliding doors, removable seats, and car-like handling. Families embraced minivans enthusiastically. They could transport children, sports equipment, groceries, and everything else modern families needed. The vehicles became symbols of suburban family life, practical choices for parents prioritizing functionality over image. Some drivers, particularly men, resisted minivans' image as uncool or boring, but practicality usually won. Minivans enabled carpooling, road trips, and the busy schedules of families with multiple children in various activities. Competitors quickly entered the market with their own models. The minivan's success came partly at station wagons' expense, as families found minivans more versatile and modern. The vehicle type reflected and enabled certain lifestyle patterns: suburban living, child-focused families, active schedules requiring transportation of people and equipment. Minivans became so associated with family life that they were sometimes called soccer mom mobiles, a term that itself reflected social patterns. The minivan represented automotive design responding to real needs rather than just stylistic preferences. Personal computing magazines proliferate. The personal computer revolution spawned specialized magazines, serving enthusiasts, professionals, and curious newcomers. Publications like Compute, Byte, PC Magazine, and Macworld provided reviews, programming tutorials, industry news, and tips for getting more from computers. These magazines were thick with content and advertising, reflecting the industry's growth and reader enthusiasm. Many included program listings actual code readers could type into their computers to create games or utilities. This represented both the era's do-it-yourself ethos and the scarcity of available software. Computer magazines served educational functions, helping readers understand rapidly evolving technology. They also built communities, connecting readers through letters, sections, and user groups. The magazines reviewed hardware and software, helping consumers navigate purchasing decisions in a confusing marketplace. Advertisements revealed the industry's diversity, countless companies competing with various computers, peripherals, and software. The magazines documented the personal computer revolution as it happened, capturing excitement, confusion, and rapid change. Reading these publications provided windows into a transforming world where computers promised to change everything, though exactly how remained unclear. The magazine's success demonstrated strong demand for computer information and the technology's transition from hobbyist curiosity to mainstream significance. Many publications thrived throughout the decade, before eventually declining as the internet provided information more immediately. Trivial Pursuit and game night culture. Trivial Pursuit's success in the 1980s revitalized board game culture and sparked broader trends. The game's popularity encouraged other adult-oriented games emphasizing knowledge, creativity, or social interaction rather than just children's games. Pictionary, where players drew clues, became another hit. These games facilitated social gatherings, game nights, where adults gathered to play, socialize, and compete. The trend reflected several factors: desire for screen-free entertainment, appreciation for face-to-face social interaction, and perhaps reaction against isolation that modern life sometimes created. Game nights provided structured social activities, especially valuable for people whose friendships were busy with work and family obligations. The games worked across generations and skill levels, making them accessible for mixed groups. Some families made game nights regular traditions, setting aside specific evenings for playing together. The trend represented a small counter-movement against the decade's technology embrace. Valuing analog entertainment and direct human interaction, game manufacturers responded by releasing numerous titles aimed at adult markets, creating a minor boom in the industry. While video games and television remained dominant entertainment forms, board games carved out a persistent niche, proving that even in an increasingly digital world, there was appetite for gathering around tables to roll dice, draw pictures, and test knowledge together. Corporate casual Friday workplace dress codes began relaxing slightly during the 1980s with the introduction of Casual Friday, where employees could dress less formally than usual. The practice started in some industries and gradually spread, though implementation varied widely. For some companies, casual meant khakis and polo shirts instead of suits and ties. For others, it merely meant removing the suit jacket. Casual Friday represented a small loosening of corporate culture's rigid formality. Proponents argued it improved morale, made employees more comfortable, and acknowledged that formal business attire wasn't always necessary for productivity. Critics worried about professionalism's erosion and the difficulty of defining appropriate casual wear. The practice raised questions. How casual was too casual? Did Casual Friday apply to everyone or just certain departments? Should clients visiting on Fridays see casually dressed employees? Despite complications, many employees appreciated even slight freedom from restrictive dress codes. The trend reflected broader cultural shifts toward informality and questioning of traditional corporate norms. Casual Friday was a minor accommodation, hardly revolutionary, but it signaled changing attitudes about workplace culture. The practice foreshadowed more dramatic changes in coming decades, when some industries would abandon formal dress codes entirely. In the 1980s, however, Casual Friday remained a limited exception to prevailing formality, a small rebellion against suits and ties that most workers still wore 4 days weekly. The growth of warehouse clubs. Retail innovation during the 1980s included warehouse clubs, like Price Club, founded 1976, but expanding in the 80s, and Costco, founded 1983. These membership-based stores offered discounted merchandise in no-frills warehouse environments. Products came in bulk sizes, with limited selection compared to traditional retailers, but significantly lower prices. The concept appealed to families, small businesses, and anyone willing to buy larger quantities for savings. The warehouse club experience differed dramatically from traditional retail: concrete floors, industrial shelving, minimal service, and checkout lines that could stretch long. Products ranged from groceries to electronics, furniture to clothing, often with inventory changing based on available deals. The membership fee, typically around $25, annually, created commitment, but also exclusivity and the sense of accessing special deals. Warehouse clubs challenged traditional retail by demonstrating that many shoppers prioritized price over ambiance or service. The stores succeeded despite, or perhaps because of, their stripped-down approach. They represented democratization of wholesale purchasing, previously available mainly to businesses. The model's success forced traditional retailers to reconsider pricing and operations. Warehouse clubs became destinations for weekend shopping trips, where families would stock up on everything from paper towels to televisions, pushing enormous carts through vast warehouses in pursuit of deals. Hair metal and glam rock music in the 1980s developed a subgenre emphasizing spectacle, appearance, and accessibility alongside musical performance. Bands like Motley Crue, Poison, Def Leppard, and Bon Jovi combined hard rock music with glam aesthetics, big hair often teased and sprayed into impressive manes, makeup, spandex, leather, and flashy stage shows. These bands dominated MTV and arena tours, appealing to audiences seeking entertainment and escapism. The music featured catchy hooks, guitar solos, and lyrics about partying, romance, and living fast. Critics dismissed hair metal as superficial, more concerned with image than substance. But fans embraced the fun, energy, and spectacle. The genre represented rock's commercial peak. These bands sold millions of albums and filled stadiums. Music videos were essential to success, with bands creating cinematic productions featuring elaborate sets, storylines, and of course, showcasing their distinctive looks. The scene centered partly in Los Angeles' Sunset Strip, where clubs like the Whiskey, A Go-Go, and the Roxy hosted performances. Hair metal represented a particular moment when rock embraced excess and showmanship without irony or apology. The movement's popularity would fade as the decade ended, and grunge emerged. But during the 1980s, hair metal dominated rock's commercial landscape. The genre's emphasis on image and accessibility made rock more mainstream, but also contributed to perceptions that rock had become too polished and corporate, ultimately sparking the raw alternative rock movement. Lyme disease identified. The 1980s brought recognition of Lyme disease, a tick-borne illness that had been causing mysterious symptoms in the northeastern United States. The disease was named after Lyme, Connecticut, where a cluster of cases in the 1970s had prompted investigation. In 1982, scientist Willy Bergdorfer identified the bacterial cause, later named Borrelia burgdorferi in his honor. Understanding the disease's cause allowed development of diagnostic tests and treatment protocols. Lyme disease symptoms could include a distinctive bullseye rash, flu-like symptoms, joint pain, and if untreated, serious neurological problems. The disease's emergence coincided with suburban expansion into formerly rural areas, where deer and ticks were common, bringing humans into closer contact with disease vectors. Public health campaigns educated people about tick prevention, wearing long pants in wooded areas, checking for ticks after outdoor activities, and prompt removal of attached ticks. Lyme disease awareness represented recognition that new infectious diseases could emerge and that human environmental changes could create new health risks. The disease particularly affected outdoor enthusiasts and people living near wooded areas. While treatable with antibiotics if caught early, Lyme disease could cause chronic problems if diagnosis was delayed, making awareness and prevention crucial. The identification of Lyme disease demonstrated ongoing needs for disease surveillance and research. Even in developed countries where infectious diseases seemed largely controlled, shoulder-held camcorders became portable. As the 1980s progressed, camcorder technology improved significantly, with devices becoming smaller, lighter, and more affordable. Early models weighed several pounds and required shoulder mounting for stability. Later models could be held in one hand, dramatically improving portability and ease of use. Battery life improved, recording time increased, and features like autofocus and automatic exposure made filming easier for amateurs. The reduced size and weight meant camcorders could go more places: family vacations, children's sporting events, casual gatherings capturing moments that bulkier equipment would have missed. The technology's evolution followed a pattern common in consumer electronics. Initial products were expensive and limited to enthusiasts or wealthy consumers, but competition and technological improvement gradually brought prices down and capabilities up. By decade's end, camcorders were approaching true consumer products rather than semi-professional equipment. This democratization of video recording meant more families could afford to document their lives, creating visual histories that previous generations preserved only through photographs and memories. The technology also enabled amateur video production beyond family documentation. Wedding videography became a profession, local events were recorded, and some people began creating video art or documentaries. The camcorder represented another step in the broader pattern of technology, empowering individuals with capabilities previously requiring professional equipment and expertise. The rise of celebrity culture. The 1980s saw intensification of celebrity culture, where famous individuals became objects of public fascination, extending beyond their professional accomplishments. Tabloid magazines like People, Us, and National Enquirer thrived by providing details about celebrities' personal lives, relationships, and scandals. Television shows like Entertainment Tonight and Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous offered glimpses into celebrity worlds. The combination of cable television, MTV, and tabloid journalism created an environment where fame itself became valuable regardless of underlying talent or achievement. Celebrities appeared on talk shows, magazine covers, and advertisements, leveraging fame across multiple platforms. Some individuals became famous for being famous, known primarily for their visibility rather than specific accomplishments. The Princess Diana phenomenon exemplified celebrity culture's global reach. Her wedding, fashion, and personal struggles were followed obsessively worldwide. Celebrity culture reflected and reinforced the decade's materialistic values. Celebrities demonstrated what money could buy, and their lifestyles became aspirational. Critics worried about superficiality and the elevation of fame over more substantive achievements. Supporters saw harmless entertainment and noted that public fascination with notable individuals wasn't new, just more extensively documented. Celebrity culture generated substantial economic activity through magazines, television programs, and products endorsed by or associated with famous people. The 1980s established patterns that intensified with subsequent technology, creating the celebrity-obsessed culture familiar today. Frequent flyer programs. Launch air travel changed in the 1980s, with the introduction of frequent flyer programs that rewarded customer loyalty. American Airlines launched the first major program, AAdvantage, in 1981, with other airlines quickly following. These programs awarded miles based on flight distance, with accumulated miles redeemable for free flights, upgrades, or other benefits. The programs created incentives for travelers to choose specific airlines consistently, rather than simply shopping for lowest fares. Business travelers particularly benefited, accumulating miles from work travel that they could use personally. Frequent flyer programs represented airlines' adaptation to deregulation, which had increased competition and price pressure. The programs built customer loyalty while costing airlines relatively little. Empty seats had minimal marginal cost, so filling them with mileage redemptions was economically efficient. The program's success spawned imitators across industries. Hotels, rental cars, and credit cards created their own loyalty programs. Frequent flyer miles became a form of currency, with some people strategizing to maximize accumulation. The programs changed how people thought about travel, sometimes choosing flights or routes based on mileage earning rather than pure convenience. The psychology was effective. Small rewards kept customers engaged and loyal. Frequent flyer programs represented the service industry's growing sophistication in customer relationship management and use of data to drive behavior. Lean cuisine and diet foods. Weight consciousness in the 1980s spawned a booming industry of diet and light foods. Lean cuisine, frozen dinners, introduced in 1981, offered portion-controlled, lower-calorie meals that appealed to dieters and busy people seeking convenient options. The brand's success spawned competitors' Weight Watchers meals, Healthy Choice, and numerous store brands. These products represented the food industry's response to consumers' dual desires for convenience and weight management. The meals weren't gourmet frozen. Diet dinners had reputations for small portions and questionable taste, but they solved problems for people watching calories while maintaining busy schedules. Diet foods extended beyond frozen dinners to include low-calorie snacks, sugar-free desserts, and artificially sweetened beverages. Products prominently displayed calorie counts, emphasizing diet friendliness. The trend reflected cultural obsession with thinness and appearance, particularly pressure on women to maintain specific body types. Health concerns about obesity provided some justification, but the diet food industry also profited from insecurities and unrealistic beauty standards. Nutritionists noted that highly processed diet foods might not be healthier than eating smaller portions of regular food, but convenience and portion control appealed to consumers. The diet food boom demonstrated how cultural values around appearance could drive entire market segments, creating products that promised solutions to socially constructed problems while generating substantial profits. Boomboxes and street culture. The portable stereo, often called a boombox or ghetto blaster, became cultural symbols of the 1980s, particularly in urban environments. These large, battery-powered cassette players, with built-in speakers, allowed people to take music anywhere, playing it loudly enough for public enjoyment or annoyance, depending on perspective. Boomboxes appeared in parks, on street corners, at beaches, and on public transportation, providing soundtracks to urban life. In hip-hop culture, boomboxes held particular significance, associated with breakdancers and street performers who used them to play music for impromptu performances. The devices varied from basic models to elaborate systems, with multiple tape decks, graphic equalizers, and impressive bass. Carrying a large boombox on one's shoulder became an iconic image of 1980s urban youth culture. The phenomenon raised questions about public space and sound, whose right to play music versus others' right to quiet. Some cities passed ordinances limiting volume in public spaces, while defenders argued for freedom of expression and the vitality boomboxes brought to urban environments. As the decade progressed, and personal listening devices like the Walkman became popular, boombox use declined somewhat, but they remained cultural symbols of a particular time when music was communal and public rather than private and isolated through headphones. The Preppy Handbook as cultural commentary, the official Preppy Handbook, published in 1980, became a surprise bestseller by both celebrating and satirizing preppy culture. Written by Lisa Birnbach and others, the book presented itself as a guide to preppy lifestyle, clothing, language, behavior, values, but with enough irony that readers could interpret it as either instruction manual or mockery. The book detailed proper preppy attire: Lacoste shirts, Sperry topsiders, khakis, acceptable schools, Ivy League colleges, certain prep schools, appropriate activities, tennis, sailing, squash, and even preppy names for children. Illustrations and detailed descriptions created a comprehensive portrait of a particular subculture. The book's success indicated Americans' fascination with class markers and social signaling. Some readers embraced it genuinely, using it to adopt preppy style and attitudes. Others enjoyed it as satire, finding humor in the detailed documentation of what might be seen as privileged provincialism. The book made explicit what had been implicit class and cultural identity, expressed through consumption choices and behaviors. It democratized preppy knowledge, making the codes available to anyone who bought the book, though whether understanding the codes equaled authentic membership remained debatable. The official Preppy Handbook captured a particular cultural moment when class distinctions were simultaneously reinforced and commodified, when identity could be purchased through proper consumption, and when Americans were both drawn to and uncomfortable with visible class markers.